She was sold as a maid, yet the widowed mountain man gave her a love that changed everything. The cold wind moved slowly through the tall pine trees of the mountains. Snow covered the ground, and the sky looked gray and quiet. In a small trading post at the edge of the mountain trail, a few travelers were warming themselves near a fire. Horses stood outside, their breath turning into white clouds in the cold air. Near the wooden counter stood a young woman named Eliza. She looked tired and nervous, holding a small cloth bag with the few things she owned. Her dress was simple and worn, and her eyes showed the sadness of someone who had faced many hard days. Eliza had no family left and no place to go. Life had not been kind to her. After losing her parents and struggling to survive in a nearby town, she had been forced to accept work wherever she could find it. Now she had been brought to this trading post so someone could hire her as a maid. The owner of the trading post, Mr. Harlan, was speaking to a few travelers. "She's a good worker," he said, "quiet, respectful, and hardworking. Anyone needing help at home can take her along." Eliza kept her eyes down. Hearing people talk about her like that made her feel small, but she stayed silent. She had learned that arguing would only make things worse. All she wanted was a safe place to work and sleep. Most of the men in the trading post only glanced at her for a moment before looking away. Some were travelers passing through, and others already had their own families or workers. The room slowly became quiet again as people returned to their food and warm drinks. Then the door opened. A tall man stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air with him. Snow rested on the shoulders of his thick coat, and his boots were covered in mud and ice from the mountain trail. The man was Caleb Turner, a mountain man who lived far up in the hills. People in the area knew Caleb as a quiet and honest man. He lived alone in a wooden cabin deep in the mountains. Years earlier, his wife had passed away, and since then he had spent most of his time hunting, trapping, and working the land. Caleb nodded politely to Mr. Harlan and walked toward the fire to warm his hands. "Long ride today?" Mr. Harlan asked. "Long enough," Caleb replied calmly. Needed a few supplies before the next snowstorm. As Caleb waited for his supplies, his eyes moved across the room. That was when he noticed Eliza standing quietly near the counter. She looked nervous, like someone unsure where she belonged. Caleb frowned slightly. "Who's the girl?" he asked. Mr. Harlan glanced toward Eliza. "She's looking for work," he explained. "Hard times brought her here. Thought maybe someone passing through might need a maid." Caleb looked at Eliza again, this time more carefully. She did not look lazy or dishonest. Instead, she looked frightened and uncertain, like someone who had spent too long worrying about tomorrow. Eliza slowly lifted her eyes and noticed Caleb looking at her. For a moment she froze, unsure what to expect. But the man's face showed no anger or judgment, only quiet thought. Caleb walked closer. "What kind of work can you do?" he asked in a calm voice. Eliza spoke softly. "I can cook simple meals, clean, wash clothes, and take care of a home." Her voice shook a little, but she tried to remain brave. Caleb nodded. "My cabin could use help," he said. "It's far in the mountains. Quiet place. Not easy living, but honest work." Eliza looked surprised. No one else had shown interest in hiring her. "You'd be safe there," Caleb added. "I only need someone to keep the place in order while I work outside." Mr. Harlan rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "That might be a good arrangement," he said. "Caleb's a fair man." Eliza felt a small spark of hope inside her chest, something she had not felt in a long time. Would you really take me?" she asked quietly. Caleb gave a small nod. "If you're willing to work and respect the home, you're welcome." For a moment, Eliza could hardly believe it. The mountains were far away and unfamiliar, but the man standing before her seemed kind and steady. And kindness was something she had not seen much of lately. Outside, the wind moved across the snowy trail, and the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. Neither of them knew it yet, but this simple decision at a quiet trading post would begin a story that would change both of their lives. The next morning, the sky over the mountains was pale and cold. The snow on the ground sparkled under the early sunlight. Caleb's horse moved slowly along the narrow mountain trail, carrying supplies tied behind the saddle. Eliza rode behind him on a small mule that Caleb had borrowed from the trading post. She held the rope carefully and looked around with wide eyes. The mountains felt huge and quiet. Tall pine trees covered the hills, and the air smelled clean and fresh. For Eliza, everything felt new and a little frightening. She had never traveled so far from town before. The path was narrow, and sometimes the trail curved along steep cliffs. But Caleb rode calmly, as if he had walked these paths 1,000 times. After many hours of riding, Caleb finally pointed ahead. "There," he said. Eliza followed his gaze. In a small clearing between the trees stood a simple wooden cabin. Smoke rose gently from a small chimney. Beside the cabin stood a woodshed and a small fenced garden that was now covered in snow. It was quiet, very quiet. No loud streets, no shouting voices, only the wind moving through the trees. "This is my place," Caleb said. They reached the cabin, and Caleb helped Eliza climb down from the mule. His movements were calm and respectful. "Come inside," he said. "It's warmer in there." When Eliza stepped inside, she looked around slowly. The cabin was simple but neat. A small table stood near the window. A stone fireplace warmed the room. There were shelves with tools, jars of food, and a few books. A rocking chair sat near the fire. It did not look like the home of a rich man, but it felt safe and peaceful. "You can leave your things there," Caleb said, pointing to a wooden chest. Eliza placed her small bag down carefully. Caleb removed his coat and began placing supplies on the table. "We'll keep things simple here," he explained. "I hunt, chop wood, and work outside. Inside work will be cooking, cleaning, and keeping the place in order." Eliza nodded quickly. "I can do that," she said. Caleb gave a small approving nod. "Good. And you'll have your own room." Eliza blinked in surprise. "My own room?" Caleb walked to a small door near the back of the cabin and opened it. Inside was a tiny but clean room with a bed, a blanket, and a small window that looked out toward the forest. "It's not fancy," Caleb said, "but it's yours." Eliza stepped inside slowly. The bed looked soft compared to hard places she had slept before. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time in many weeks, she felt a little less afraid. Later that evening, Caleb showed her where the cooking supplies were kept. "I usually make simple food," he said. "Soup, bread, and whatever I bring back from hunting." Eliza smiled a little. "I can cook stew," she said, "and maybe bake bread." Caleb looked pleased. That would be nice. While Caleb went outside to stack firewood, Eliza carefully began cleaning the kitchen area. She washed a few dishes and organized the shelves. The cabin slowly began to feel brighter. When Caleb returned, he noticed the changes. "You work quickly," he said. Eliza looked a little shy. "I like things to feel like a home," she replied. Caleb did not answer for a moment. He simply looked around the room. For a long time after his wife passed away, the cabin had felt empty, but now something felt different. That night, they sat at the table and ate a warm stew Eliza had prepared. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace. At first, neither of them spoke much. Eliza was still unsure about talking too much. She had learned to stay quiet in places where she worked. But Caleb finally broke the silence. "The mountains can feel lonely sometimes," he said. Eliza looked up. "I think quiet can be nice," she replied softly. Caleb gave a small smile. "Maybe you're right." After dinner, Eliza washed the dishes while Caleb repaired a lantern near the table. Outside, snow slowly began to fall again. The forest became quiet and peaceful. Before we go to bed, Caleb spoke again. "If you ever feel uncomfortable here, you can tell me," he said. "You're not a prisoner. This is just work and a place to stay." Eliza looked surprised by his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. "I understand," she said quietly. And she meant it. For the first time in a long while, Eliza felt that she might finally be somewhere safe. And as the snow continued to fall outside the cabin, the quiet mountain home slowly began to change. What had once been a lonely place for Caleb was slowly becoming something warmer, something closer to a real home. Days slowly turned into weeks in the quiet mountain cabin. The heavy snow that once covered everything began to melt little by little. Small drops of water fell from the roof, and the forest slowly woke from the long winter. Life in the cabin had found a peaceful rhythm. Every morning, Caleb woke early before the sun fully rose. He stepped outside to check the traps, gather firewood, or feed the mule in the small shed. The cold air was sharp, but he was used to it. Living in the mountains had made him strong and patient. Inside the cabin, Eliza also began her day early. She lit the fire in the stone fireplace and warmed water for tea. Soon the smell of fresh bread or warm porridge filled the cabin. For someone who had once lived with worry every day, these simple tasks gave her a quiet sense of purpose. At first, Eliza had been very careful with every step she took, afraid of making mistakes. But Caleb never shouted, never spoke harshly, and never treated her like she was less than him. Slowly, the fear inside her heart began to fade. One morning, Caleb returned from the forest carrying a bundle of dry branches. When he opened the door, he noticed something new. Eliza had placed a small jar of wild pine branches on the table near the window. The green leaves added a fresh smell to the room. Caleb paused for a moment. "That's new," he said. Eliza looked up from the kitchen. "I found them outside yesterday," she said. "I thought the cabin might look nicer." Caleb nodded slowly. "It does." He placed the firewood beside the fireplace and looked around the cabin again. The place felt warmer now, not just because of the fire, but because someone cared about it. Later that afternoon, the weather became brighter. The clouds moved away, and the sun finally appeared. Eliza stepped outside for the first time in many days to enjoy the fresh air. The mountains stretched far into the distance, their tops still covered in white snow. Birds flew between the tall pine trees, and the sound of a small stream could be heard nearby. Caleb was repairing a wooden fence near the garden. Eliza watched him work for a moment before speaking. "Do you always live here alone?" she asked. Caleb stopped working and rested his hands on the fence. "For many years," he replied. Eliza hesitated before asking her next question. "Do you ever feel lonely?" Caleb looked toward the mountains. "Sometimes," he admitted. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet sadness behind it. "My wife and I built this cabin together," he continued. "She loved these mountains." Eliza listened carefully. Caleb rarely spoke about his past. "What happened?" she asked gently. Caleb was silent for a moment. The wind moved softly through the trees. "She became sick one winter," he said. "The nearest doctor was too far away." He did not say anything more. Eliza felt a deep sadness in her heart. She could see that Caleb still carried that loss quietly every day. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Caleb nodded once, and then picked up his tools again. It was a long time ago. But even as he said those words, Eliza could tell that some memories never truly faded. Over the next few days, the weather grew warmer. The snow around the cabin melted faster, revealing patches of earth and small plants beneath. Eliza decided to start cleaning the old garden area beside the cabin. The wooden fence around it had fallen in some places, and dry weeds covered the ground. Caleb noticed her working there one afternoon. "You don't have to do that," he said. Eliza smiled slightly. "I like gardens," she replied, "and the soil looks good." Caleb watched her pull away old weeds and clear the ground. "Maybe we can grow vegetables here," she continued. "Carrots, potatoes, maybe even flowers." "Flowers?" Caleb repeated with a small smile. "Yes," Eliza said. "Home should have flowers." Caleb looked at the empty garden again. For many years he had only used the land to survive. He had never thought much about making it beautiful. But seeing Eliza working there gave him a new feeling. "All right," he said finally, "let's fix the fence first." Together, they began repairing the broken wooden posts. Caleb hammered the boards into place, while Eliza held them steady. As they worked side by side, the quiet between them felt comfortable. Neither of them realized how much their lives had already begun to change. The lonely mountain man who once lived in silence now had laughter returning to his home, and the young woman who once had nowhere to go had finally found a place where she felt safe. But deep inside Eliza's heart, one small worry still remained. She hoped that her past would never come looking for her, because this peaceful life in the mountains had already become more precious to her than she could ever imagine. Spring slowly arrived in the mountains. The snow that once covered the ground had almost disappeared, and fresh green grass began to grow around the cabin. Small flowers appeared near the trees, adding color to the quiet forest. The garden beside the cabin was no longer empty. Thanks to Eliza's hard work, neat rows of vegetables had been planted. Tiny green leaves were already pushing through the soil. Every morning, Eliza stepped outside to water the plants and check the garden. The sunlight warmed her face, and the mountain air felt fresh and peaceful. Caleb often watched her from the cabin door. For many years, he had lived alone in the mountains, thinking that his life would always stay the same. After losing his wife, he believed the quiet cabin would remain a lonely place forever. But things had changed. The cabin now felt alive. The kitchen was warm with the smell of cooking. The garden was growing, and laughter sometimes filled the air when Eliza shared simple stories about the places she had traveled. One afternoon, Caleb returned from the forest, carrying a small sack of supplies. When he opened the door, he saw Eliza sitting near the window, sewing a small tear in one of his shirts. She looked up and smiled politely. "You're back early," she said. Caleb placed the sack on the table. "The weather turned warmer," he replied. "Thought it was a good day to finish work early." Eliza nodded and continued sewing. For a moment, Caleb stood quietly, thinking about something. "Come outside for a minute," he said. Eliza looked curious, but followed him out of the cabin. They walked a short distance behind the house, where the land opened toward a beautiful view of the mountains. The sun was slowly beginning to set, and the sky was turning shades of gold and orange. Eliza had seen this view before, but it always made her stop and stare. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Caleb nodded. "My wife used to sit here in the evenings," he said. "She loved watching the sunset." Eliza stayed quiet, respecting the memory. After a moment, Caleb spoke again. "For a long time after she passed away, I thought this place would always feel empty." He looked toward the cabin. "But since you came, things feel different." Eliza felt her heart beat a little faster. She had never expected to hear those words. Caleb was not a man who spoke about feelings often. He was quiet and careful with his words. "You brought life back to this place," he continued. "The garden, the laughter, even the way the cabin feels now." Eliza lowered her eyes, feeling shy. "I only did what I could," she said. Caleb shook his head gently. "You did more than that." The wind moved softly through the tall trees around them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb took a slow breath. "I asked you to come here as a worker," he said. "But somewhere along the way, you became something more important than that." Eliza looked up, surprised. Caleb's voice remained calm and sincere. "This cabin doesn't feel like a workplace anymore," he continued. "It feels like a home again." Eliza felt warmth in her chest. She had never expected to feel so safe and valued in someone else's home. For a long time, she had believed her life would always be uncertain and lonely. But standing there in the quiet mountain evening, she realized something important. Her life had changed. "You gave me a place when I had nowhere to go," she said softly. "You treated me with kindness when I expected nothing." Caleb nodded slowly. "Kindness should never be rare," he said. The sun dipped lower behind the mountains, painting the sky with deep colors. Eliza looked toward the cabin, the small garden, and the peaceful forest around them. This place was no longer strange or unfamiliar. It had become her home. Caleb spoke again, his voice gentle. "If you wish to stay here, you can," he said. "Not just as someone working in a house, but as someone who belongs here." Eliza felt tears form in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. For the first time in many years, she felt truly accepted. "I would like that very much," she replied quietly. Caleb gave a small, warm smile. The two of them stood there together, watching the last light of the sunset disappear behind the mountains. The lonely mountain cabin that once held only silence had now become a place of warmth, hope, and new beginnings. Sometimes life takes people through difficult paths before leading them to the place where they truly belong. And for Eliza and Caleb, that place was a quiet cabin in the mountains, a home where kindness and simple love had changed everything.